Bryan Kohberger. Inside the Idaho University murders that shook a nation. A startling beginning. Moscow, Idaho, a small and serene town nestled in the picturesque landscapes of the American West, was known for its peaceful atmosphere and slow-paced life. But on November 13, 2022, that tranquility was shattered by a horrifying crime. 4 young students from the University of Idaho were brutally murdered in their own home, leaving a community devastated and in shock. What made this case even more chilling was the mystery surrounding the identity of the perpetrator. The house at 1122 King Road, the scene of the tragedy, had once been a lively space filled with youthful energy and joy. The house at 1122 King Road, the scene of the tragedy, had once been a lively space filled with youthful energy and joy. This 3-story home, occupied by 5 students that night, turned into a macabre crime scene overnight. While 6 students were on the lease, only 5 were present. There were 2 surviving roommates, who were reportedly asleep on the lower floors during the attack. Another of the residents who shared the house was not there that night. That morning, a desperate 911 call from one of the surviving residents brought police to the house, where they encountered an unthinkable sight. All 4 victims had been stabbed multiple times, likely with a hunting knife. Yet, there were no signs of forced entry, though it was later reported that the sliding glass door may have been unlocked, providing possible access to the perpetrator. The victims Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were quickly identified. These names represented not just promising lives cut short, but also dreams left unfulfilled. Kaylee and Madison were childhood best friends who had grown up together in Idaho, sharing every milestone, from small joys to grand aspirations. Xana Kernodle was described as a vibrant and lively student who lived in the house with her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, a young athlete with an infectious enthusiasm for life. Together, they formed the heart of a close-knit group of friends, making the loss even more unbearable for those who knew them. Stories of the victims' lives spread rapidly, not just within the local community, but across the nation. Each victim was remembered as a person full of dreams and ambitions, with distinct personalities that shone brightly. Kaylee was known for her determination and leadership, while Madison's warmth and kindness made her a favorite among peers. Xana's love for adventure and Ethan's unwavering positivity left an indelible mark on everyone around them. Social media posts and interviews with friends and family painted a poignant picture of the immense loss felt by their untimely deaths. Law enforcement agencies began their investigation immediately, but were met with significant challenges. The 911 call, made around noon on November 13th by one of the surviving roommates, reported an unconscious person. The content of the call remains partially undisclosed, but the delay of several hours and the nature of the report sparked intense speculation online. There were no signs of forced entry, no unusual noises reported during the night of the murders, and no direct witnesses. The surviving residents, who had been asleep on the lower floors, reported hearing nothing except the stillness of a cold autumn night. This made reconstructing the events of that fateful night an exceptionally difficult task. The timeline of the incident started to take shape. On the evening of November 12th, Kaylee and Madison went out together, enjoying a night at a local bar. Meanwhile, Xana and Ethan attended a fraternity party on campus. All 4 returned home before 2 a.m. None of them could have anticipated that it would be the last time they saw each other alive. A few hours later, the killer entered the house and committed the heinous act. As initial details of the case emerged, public reaction was one of fear and outrage. Moscow, a town accustomed to a sense of safety, now lived in the shadow of a suspected killer still at large. The University of Idaho immediately canceled classes, advising students to stay indoors. Parents hurriedly arrived to bring their children home, seeking safety far from the unfolding terror. Amid the chaos, one crucial detail emerged from the initial investigation: a cryptic and desperate 911 call placed by one of the surviving housemates. Though the exact circumstances of the call remain unclear, it was enough to bring law enforcement to the scene swiftly. This detail sparked intense speculation online, with many questioning the circumstances surrounding the survivors' experiences that night. The pressing questions loomed large. Who could commit such a heinous act? What was the motive? Why these young individuals? These questions not only puzzled investigators, but also haunted the minds of everyone in the community. National media outlets converged on Moscow, providing round-the-clock coverage, while conspiracy theories began to swirl online. Speculations ranged from personal vendettas to random violence, each theory adding to the atmosphere of fear and suspicion. Investigators faced increasing pressure from both the public and the media. Press conferences were held frequently, but the only consistent message from law enforcement was that they were working tirelessly to find the perpetrator. Every detail of the case timeline was scrutinized, and surveillance cameras around the area became vital tools in piecing together what happened. A key lead came in the form of footage capturing a white Hyundai Elantra near the crime scene during the estimated time of the murders, sparking a nationwide effort to identify the vehicle. Meanwhile, the victims' families remained vocal, demanding justice. They shared heartfelt memories of their loved ones, transforming their grief into determination to keep the case in the public eye. Each interview and statement carried profound pain, but also an unyielding resilience, reflecting the strength of the community. Kaylee's family in particular became prominent voices, advocating for transparency and persistence in the investigation. As the story unfolded, one thing became clear. This was more than just a murder case. It was a narrative of a community scarred, of unanswered questions, and of a lasting trauma that would not easily fade. Moscow, Idaho could never return to what it once was. Yet, in the midst of this darkness, the hope for justice remained a light that refused to be extinguished. The investigation begins. The investigation into the brutal murders at 1122 King Road began immediately, but it was clear from the outset that this would not be an easy case to solve. Local law enforcement, bolstered by assistance from the Idaho State Police and the FBI, faced a daunting task, piecing together the events of that horrific night while under immense pressure from a grieving community and a national media frenzy. The crime scene. Upon arrival, investigators were met with a scene that was both gruesome and perplexing. The victims, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernadle, and Ethan Chapin, were discovered in their respective bedrooms on the second and third floors of the house. The brutality of the attacks suggested a level of rage or intent that pointed to a deeply personal motive. However, the lack of forced entry and the absence of any immediately apparent connection to the killer complicated the investigation. Forensic teams meticulously examined the house, collecting over 100 pieces of physical evidence. They also gathered biological samples and used advanced luminol techniques to detect blood traces not visible to the naked eye. However, the killer appeared to have been careful. Despite the chaos of the scene, few clues were left behind, leaving investigators to rely heavily on the forensic evidence they could uncover. Key clues emerge. One of the first major breakthroughs came from a piece of evidence that would later become central to the investigation: the sheath of a large hunting knife. Found near one of the victims, the sheath bore traces of DNA. At the time, the DNA sample was unidentified, but its presence gave investigators a crucial lead. It suggested that, despite the killer's efforts to avoid leaving evidence, a mistake had been made. Another critical clue emerged from surveillance footage gathered from nearby homes and businesses. In several videos, a white Hyundai Elantra was seen driving through the area multiple times during the early morning hours of November 13th. The vehicle's movements raised suspicions, as it appeared to circle the vicinity of the house before disappearing from view. Investigators issued a nationwide alert for information about the vehicle, urging anyone with knowledge of a similar car to come forward. The survivors' accounts. 2 surviving roommates, who had been asleep on the ground floor during the murders, provided statements to the police. Their accounts, while limited, shed light on the timeline of events. One of the roommates reportedly saw an unidentified figure leaving the house in the early hours of the morning, but initially thought it might have been a house guest. The detail of this sighting added another layer of mystery, as it suggested the killer might have left without alarming anyone else in the house. Community tension and media pressure. As days turned into weeks without an arrest, tensions within the community grew. Residents of Moscow, a town unaccustomed to violent crime, lived in fear, locking their doors and looking over their shoulders. Students at the University of Idaho were particularly shaken, with many opting to leave campus until the killer was caught. Public frustration with the perceived lack of progress mounted, and online speculation about potential suspects added to the pressure on law enforcement. The media's role in the case was both a help and a hindrance. On one hand, the widespread coverage kept the case in the public eye and led to a flood of tips to investigators. On the other hand, misinformation and unfounded theories spread rapidly, sometimes diverting attention from the real evidence. The first suspicions. By mid-December 2022, the pieces of the puzzle began to come together. The DNA from the knife sheath was run through a genetic genealogy database, leading to a potential match. The white Hyundai Elantra was traced to a man named Bryan Kohberger, a graduate student studying criminology at Washington State University, just a short drive from Moscow. Kohberger's background raised eyebrows. As a student of criminology, he had expressed an intense interest in understanding the minds of criminals. Some of his academic work even focused on the motivations behind violent acts, making his potential involvement in the case all the more chilling. Investigators began to surveil Kohberger, tracking his movements and collecting additional evidence. The arrest. On December 30th, 2022, Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his family's home in Pennsylvania. The arrest came as a shock to those who knew him. Many described him as quiet and reserved, while others recalled interactions that hinted at a darker side. For law enforcement, the arrest marked a significant turning point in the case, but it was far from the end. Now, the challenge would be to build a case strong enough to stand up in court. As the investigation transitioned into the prosecution phase, new details about Kohberger and the evidence against him would emerge, raising even more questions about what really happened on that tragic night in Moscow, Idaho. The courtroom battle. With Bryan Kohberger in custody, the focus of the case shifted from investigation to prosecution. The courtroom would now become the stage where the evidence against him was presented, challenged, and dissected. For the victims' families and the community of Moscow, Idaho, this was a critical step toward justice. For the defense, it was an opportunity to dismantle the state's case and assert Kohberger's innocence. The prosecution's strategy. The prosecution's case was built on a combination of physical evidence, forensic science, and circumstantial connections. At the center of their argument was the DNA found on the knife sheath at the crime scene. This single piece of evidence, matched through genetic genealogy to Bryan Kohberger, was presented as a direct link between him and the murders. Additionally, the prosecution highlighted Kohberger's connection to the white Hyundai Elantra captured on surveillance footage near the crime scene. They traced the vehicle's movements before, during, and after the estimated time of the murders, arguing that its path corresponded with Kohberger's known locations. Cell phone records added another layer to the case. Prosecutors presented data showing that Kohberger's phone had been in the vicinity of the King Road house on multiple occasions before the murders, suggesting he had been surveilling the area. On the night of the crime, however, there was a suspicious gap in his phone's activity, which the prosecution interpreted as an intentional attempt to avoid detection. The prosecution also announced their intention to pursue the death penalty if Kohberger were convicted. This decision significantly raised the stakes for the trial and polarized public opinion. Advocates for the death penalty argued that such a heinous crime warranted the ultimate punishment, while opponents highlighted the potential for judicial errors and the moral complexities surrounding capital punishment. The debate intensified media coverage and underscored the high-profile nature of the case. This raised the stakes for the trial significantly and intensified public interest in the case. The defense's argument. Kohberger's defense team faced a daunting challenge. The DNA evidence and surveillance footage were compelling, but they sought to introduce doubt wherever possible. Their primary argument was that the evidence against Kohberger was circumstantial and lacked definitive proof that he was the killer. The defense questioned the reliability of the genetic genealogy methods used to match Kohberger's DNA to the crime scene. They argued that the presence of DNA on the knife sheath did not prove he committed the murders, as there were other plausible explanations for how it could have ended up there. Regarding the Hyundai Elantra, the defense pointed out that such vehicles were common and that the prosecution could not definitively prove the car in the footage was Kohberger's. They also challenged the interpretation of the cell phone records, arguing that being near the King Road house at some point did not equate to guilt. Kohberger's team also introduced an alibi, claiming he was on a late-night drive, potentially stargazing at the time of the murders. They argued this was part of his routine and unrelated to the crime, aiming to create reasonable doubt about his involvement. Pre-trial motions and venue change. In preparation for the trial, Kohberger's defense filed extensive pre-trial motions, totaling over 160 pages, challenging the admissibility of key evidence. They argued that some of the DNA samples and digital data had been improperly obtained and should be excluded from the trial. Concerns about juror bias in Latah County also led to a successful petition by the defense to relocate the trial to Ada County. The community of Moscow reacted with a mix of frustration and understanding. While some residents felt the move was necessary to ensure a fair trial, others worried it would delay justice or diminish the local impact of the proceedings. Public discussions often reflected the tension between seeking impartiality for the accused and honoring the voices of the victims' families. Survey data showed that potential jurors in Latah County harbored strong prejudices, with some even expressing intentions to riot or harm Kohberger if acquitted. This move underscored the high-profile nature of the case and the intense emotions surrounding it. Testimonies and expert witnesses. Both sides called on a series of witnesses to support their arguments. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence, the analysis of the knife sheath, and the use of genetic genealogy. Surveillance specialists broke down the movements of the Hyundai Elantra, explaining the technology and methodology used to track its path. The defense countered with their own experts, who questioned the reliability of the forensic methods and suggested alternative explanations for the evidence. They argued that contamination during the collection process could not be ruled out, pointing to potential mishandling of the knife sheath at the crime scene. Additionally, they proposed that the DNA match might have come from incidental contact rather than direct involvement in the murders. By highlighting these possibilities, the defense sought to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. Additionally, character witnesses for Kohberger described him as a quiet, studious individual, painting a picture that clashed with the image of a cold-blooded killer. Emotional impact on the families. The trial was an emotionally charged experience for the families of the victims. They sat through weeks of testimony, reliving the pain of their loss as the details of the crime were recounted in excruciating detail. Their presence in the courtroom served as a poignant reminder of what was at stake. In a powerful moment during the proceedings, a family member of one of the victims addressed the court, sharing memories of their loved one and imploring the jury to remember the human cost of the crime. This testimony underscored the profound impact the murders had on the community and added a deeply personal dimension to the case. Public reaction and media coverage. The trial attracted significant media attention, with every development scrutinized and debated in real time. Public opinion was sharply divided, with some convinced of Kohberger's guilt and others questioning the strength of the prosecution's case. On platforms like Twitter and Reddit, debates raged between armchair detectives analyzing the evidence and skeptics pointing out perceived flaws in the prosecution's narrative. Some social media users demanded swift justice for the victims, while others expressed concerns about the potential for wrongful conviction, highlighting the case's polarizing effect on public sentiment. Social media became a battleground for armchair detectives and legal analysts, amplifying the already intense spotlight on the trial. Awaiting a verdict, as the trial neared its conclusion, both sides presented their closing arguments. The prosecution emphasized the weight of the evidence, arguing that the DNA, surveillance footage, and cell phone records formed a cohesive narrative pointing to Kohberger's guilt. The defense, meanwhile, urged the jury to focus on the gaps in the prosecution's case and the principle of reasonable doubt. The jury began their deliberations under the watchful eyes of a nation captivated by the case. The process, expected to take days or even weeks, reflected the complexity of the evidence and the high stakes involved. Each juror faced the monumental task of examining the case with impartiality, aware that their decision would carry profound consequences for both the victims' families and Bryan Kohberger. For the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, the verdict would represent a crucial step toward closure, though the pain of their loss would never truly fade. For Bryan Kohberger, it was a moment that would determine his future and possibly his life. The mind of a suspect. As Bryan Kohberger awaited the jury's verdict, attention began to shift toward understanding the man at the center of this high-profile case. Who was Bryan Kohberger, and what could have driven him to commit such a heinous act? While the trial focused on evidence and legal arguments, the public and psychological experts turned their gaze toward his past, his personality, and his behavior in search of answers. A promising academic career. Bryan Kohberger was a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, just a short drive from Moscow, Idaho. His academic background was impressive on paper. He had earned a master's degree in criminal justice and had demonstrated a keen interest in understanding criminal behavior. In fact, Kohberger's research often delved into the motivations of violent offenders and the psychological factors behind their actions. Former professors and classmates described him as an intelligent but socially awkward individual. Some recalled his intense focus on criminology, occasionally bordering on obsession. In one of his most notable research projects, Kohberger surveyed individuals to explore the psychological traits influencing criminal decision-making. While initially seen as a purely academic endeavor, this project now raises questions about whether it reflected his own internal conflicts. This interest, once seen as purely academic, now took on a chilling new light in the context of his arrest. Social struggles and behavioral patterns. Outside the classroom, Kohberger's life appeared less stable. Friends and acquaintances from his younger years described him as a loner who struggled to fit in socially. Some mentioned instances where his behavior seemed controlling or manipulative, particularly in interpersonal relationships. Others noted his drastic physical transformation in recent years, which he attributed to a newfound focus on fitness and health, but which some interpreted as an effort to reinvent himself. Social media activity linked to Kohberger revealed posts and discussions that hinted at a fascination with infamous serial killers and high-profile cases, further fueling speculation about his mindset. This digital footprint further fueled speculation about his mindset leading up to the murders. A dual persona. What perplexed many was the apparent duality in Kohberger's personality. On one hand, he was a diligent student and aspiring academic. On the other, there were subtle signs of darkness, a fixation on violent crimes, a lack of close personal connections, and a growing sense of isolation. Psychologists examining Kohberger's behavior suggested that this dual persona might indicate a deeper psychological struggle. Forensic psychologists posited that his academic curiosity might have been a coping mechanism for deeper psychological conflicts, potentially creating a dangerous detachment from moral boundaries. They hypothesized that his academic interest in crime could have blurred the lines between observation and participation, leading to a dangerous detachment from reality. While such theories remain speculative, they underscored the complexity of Kohberger's character. The role of criminology. Kohberger's background in criminology raised unsettling questions. Did his studies equip him with the knowledge to plan and execute the murders? Or was his academic focus merely a coincidence? Investigators noted that his actions, such as avoiding detection by turning off his phone during the crime, indicated a calculated approach. Some experts argued that Kohberger's familiarity with forensic science and criminal investigations might have emboldened him, giving him a false sense of invincibility. Conversely, others pointed out the flaws in his execution. The presence of DNA on the knife sheath, the use of a recognizable vehicle, and his phone records suggested lapses in judgment that contradicted the image of a meticulous planner. This dichotomy added another layer of complexity to understanding his motivations. The psychological profile. As the trial unfolded, forensic psychologists pieced together a profile of Kohberger based on available information. They speculated about potential narcissistic tendencies, a need for control, and possible underlying psychological disorders. However, without direct evaluation, these remained educated guesses rather than definitive diagnoses. What became increasingly clear was that Kohberger's alleged actions did not arise in isolation. His history of social difficulties, fascination with crime, and academic pursuits painted a portrait of a man whose internal struggles might have culminated in violence. Yet, the lack of a clear motive continued to puzzle both investigators and the public. The public's obsession. The combination of Kohberger's criminology background and the brutality of the murders made him a figure of both fear and fascination. True crime enthusiasts, amateur sleuths, and media outlets dissected every detail of his life. While some sought to understand his psyche, others condemned him outright, seeing his academic pursuits as a smokescreen for darker inclinations. This intense scrutiny also raised ethical concerns. Mental health professionals cautioned against overanalyzing Kohberger without sufficient evidence, warning that speculative profiles could distort public perception and affect the fairness of the trial. Still, the questions persisted. Could Kohberger's academic pursuits have blurred the lines between observation and participation, or was this a calculated manipulation of his studies for darker purposes? Was Bryan Kohberger a calculated killer, a man driven by academic curiosity gone awry, or someone battling deeper psychological demons? Awaiting answers. As the courtroom drama unfolded, the spotlight on Kohberger's mind offered no easy answers. His actions and the mystery surrounding his motivations highlighted the enduring enigma of human behavior. For the families of the victims, however, the focus remained on securing justice, not understanding the man accused of robbing them of their loved ones. Their enduring pain underscored the human cost of the crime, reminding all that the pursuit of justice was not merely about uncovering the suspect's psyche, but about honoring the memory of those lost. The jury's verdict would determine Kohberger's legal fate, but the questions about his mind and motivations would likely linger long after the trial concluded. The verdict and its aftermath. The jury's deliberations in the trial of Bryan Kohberger were intense, spanning several days as they grappled with the complexity of the evidence and the weight of their decision. Reports indicated that the jurors painstakingly reviewed forensic findings, including the DNA evidence on the knife sheath, and debated the reliability of the surveillance footage and cell phone records. Some jurors reportedly grappled with the challenge of interpreting complex forensic data without over-relying on expert testimony, while others expressed concerns about the gaps in the prosecution's narrative. These debates underscored the difficulty of reaching a unanimous decision in such a high-stakes case. These deliberations highlighted the gravity of the task and the profound implications of their verdict. For days, they meticulously examined the DNA findings, surveillance footage, and cell phone records that the prosecution presented as a cohesive narrative of Kohberger's guilt. Equally, they considered the defense's arguments, which questioned the reliability of the evidence and highlighted gaps in the state's case. The stakes were monumental not just for Kohberger, but for the families of the victims and the community of Moscow, Idaho. The verdict. When the jury finally reached a decision, the courtroom was silent with anticipation. In a tense moment, the foreperson rose to deliver the verdict. Bryan Kohberger was found guilty on all charges, including 4 counts of first-degree murder. The announcement was met with mixed reactions, tears of relief from the victims' families, gasps from spectators, and a visible stoicism from Kohberger himself. The conviction carried profound implications. For the families of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernadle, and Ethan Chapin, the verdict represented a measure of justice for the loss of their loved ones. However, it was also a somber reminder that no legal outcome could fully heal the pain of their loss. Sentencing and its impact. Following the verdict, attention turned to the sentencing phase. The prosecution, having previously announced their intention to seek the death penalty, presented arguments for why Kohberger's crimes warranted the ultimate punishment. They emphasized the brutality of the murders, the premeditation involved, and the devastating impact on the victims' families and the community. The defense, meanwhile, argued for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. They cited mitigating factors, including Kohberger's lack of prior criminal history and his alleged struggles with mental health. Their plea was rooted in the idea that life imprisonment would ensure justice while avoiding the irreversible nature of a death sentence. In the end, the judge handed down a sentence of life imprisonment without parole, a decision that reflected both the gravity of the crimes and the contentious nature of the death penalty debate. The sentence was met with a mix of relief and lingering questions about the broader implications of the case. Among these were societal debates about the death penalty, whether it serves as a deterrent or perpetuates cycles of violence, and legal discussions about the role of forensic evidence in securing convictions. The case also prompted reflections on how media coverage might influence high-profile trials and public perceptions of justice. Reactions from the families and community. For the victims' families, the sentencing brought a sense of closure, but not an end to their grief. They spoke openly about their enduring pain and the difficulty of moving forward without their loved ones. In heartfelt statements, they expressed gratitude to law enforcement, the legal teams, and the jury for their dedication to achieving justice. The community of Moscow, still reeling from the tragedy, found solace in the conclusion of the trial. Local organizations and the University of Idaho launched new safety initiatives, including enhanced campus security measures and mental health resources, to honor the victims and prevent future tragedies. Local leaders emphasized the resilience of the town and their commitment to supporting the families and students affected by the events. At the University of Idaho, a memorial was erected to honor the lives of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, serving as a lasting tribute to their memory. Media and public response. The trial's conclusion did little to quell public interest. Media outlets dissected every aspect of the case, from the evidence presented to the courtroom dynamics. Public discussions often spilled over into social media, where hashtags like #JusticeForIdahoVictims and #KohbergerTrial trended for days. Platforms such as Twitter and Reddit hosted heated debates, with users dissecting evidence and speculating about Kohberger's motives. Some posts focused on the ethical implications of media coverage, while others shared personal reflections on the impact of the case, underscoring the depth of public engagement. True crime forums saw heated debates about the fairness of the process, with some users questioning the potential influence of pre-trial media coverage on the jury. Social media platforms buzzed with discussions about the fairness of the verdict and the ethical implications of the sentencing. True crime enthusiasts debated whether the case highlighted strengths or flaws in the criminal justice system. While many praised the legal process for delivering justice, others questioned whether the intense scrutiny and media coverage had influenced the outcome. The case became a focal point for broader conversations about the role of public opinion in high-profile trials. Lingering questions and lessons learned. Despite the verdict and sentencing, questions about Bryan Kohberger's motives remained unanswered. Observers noted the lack of a clear explanation for the crimes, sparking renewed interest in his academic background and personal life. Attention was drawn to his criminology research, particularly his project on decision-making in crimes, which some viewed as eerily reflective of the methods used in the murders. Additionally, accounts of his personal history revealed social struggles and a reported fascination with violent crime, further deepening the intrigue surrounding his motivations. This ambiguity fueled ongoing debates about whether his actions stemmed from a calculated plan or deeper psychological struggles. What drove a promising criminology student to commit such a heinous act? Were there missed signs that could have prevented the tragedy? These lingering mysteries left both experts and the public grappling with the enigma of human behavior. The case also sparked discussions about the intersection of academic curiosity and morality. Within the criminology community, professors and students reflected on the ethical boundaries of studying criminal behavior. Dr. Sarah Whitman, a noted criminologist, remarked, "Cases like this force us to question where academic curiosity ends and moral responsibility begins." Similarly, Professor James Carter suggested, while the study of criminal behavior is crucial, there must be safeguards to ensure that research does not unintentionally glorify or inspire harmful actions. These reflections highlighted the need for stricter ethical guidelines in criminology research. Some experts called for stricter oversight in research involving sensitive topics, citing Kohberger's work as a cautionary example. Kohberger's background in criminology raised uncomfortable questions about whether his studies had influenced his actions or merely reflected pre-existing tendencies. Moving forward, for the families of the victims, the path forward was one of remembrance and healing. Their advocacy for campus safety reforms and victim support initiatives became a powerful legacy born from unimaginable loss. The community of Moscow, though forever changed, demonstrated remarkable resilience, coming together to honor the lives lost and support one another. As the courtroom lights dimmed and the media frenzy subsided, the case of Bryan Kohberger remained a stark reminder of the fragility of human life and the enduring quest for justice. It left an indelible mark on all who followed it, a testament to the complexities of crime, punishment, and the human condition. Part 6, Reflections and Lingering Questions. The trial of Bryan Kohberger concluded, but the echoes of its impact continue to resonate within the legal system, the academic community, and society at large. While justice was served in the courtroom, deeper reflections on the case reveal enduring mysteries and important lessons about crime, justice, and human behavior. Unanswered questions. Despite the overwhelming evidence that led to Bryan Kohberger's conviction, critical questions remain unanswered. Chief among them is his motive. Public reactions have been mixed, with some accepting the narrative of personal grievances or psychological turmoil, while others speculate about a calculated attempt to test law enforcement's boundaries. What could have driven a promising criminology student to commit such horrific acts? Was it a calculated attempt to test the boundaries of law enforcement's capabilities? Or were his actions the result of personal grievances or psychological turmoil? Investigators and experts continue to dissect Kohberger's background, hoping to uncover patterns or events that could shed light on his motivations. The lack of a clear explanation leaves the case open to interpretation, with theories ranging from narcissistic tendencies to an obsession with control and power. This ambiguity fuels ongoing debates among criminologists, psychologists, and the public. Lessons for the legal system. The Kohberger case highlighted the strengths and weaknesses of the criminal justice system. The reliance on forensic evidence, such as DNA and digital footprints, showcased the advancements in investigative techniques. However, the defense's challenges to the admissibility of these methods raised questions about the standards of evidence and the potential for misuse of cutting-edge technology. Legal experts have called for clearer guidelines on the use of genetic genealogy in criminal cases, emphasizing the need for transparency and ethical considerations. They also noted concerns about over-reliance on digital evidence, such as cell phone records, which can be open to interpretation and potential misuse. Additionally, the trial underscored the importance of ensuring impartiality in high-profile cases, with some advocating for stricter controls on pre-trial media coverage to prevent public opinion from influencing the judicial process. Impact on academia. The academic community has been profoundly affected by the revelations about Kohberger's studies in criminology. Some professors have expressed concerns about whether academic programs inadvertently attract individuals with dangerous inclinations or provide them with tools that could be misused. Others have emphasized the need for stronger mentorship and oversight in research projects dealing with sensitive topics. His arrest and conviction prompted soul-searching among researchers and educators about the ethical boundaries of studying criminal behavior. Many have called for stricter oversight of research involving sensitive topics, particularly when it comes to projects that delve into the psychology of violent offenders. Conferences and seminars on ethics in criminology have seen increased attendance, with experts discussing how to balance academic curiosity with moral responsibility. The case also sparked debates about whether certain fields of study inadvertently attract individuals with harmful inclinations or provide them with tools to carry out their impulses. The human cost. For the families of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernagel, and Ethan Chapin, the case is far from over. While the conviction and sentencing of Bryan Kohberger provided a measure of justice, the loss of their loved ones is a wound that will never fully heal. Their advocacy for campus safety reforms and mental health support remains a testament to their resilience and determination to create positive change in the face of tragedy. The community of Moscow, Idaho, has also been forever changed. The town's tight-knit fabric was shaken by the murders, but it demonstrated remarkable unity and strength in the aftermath. Initiatives to honor the victims' memories, such as scholarships and memorials, continue to inspire hope and healing. Broader implications. The Kohberger case has left a lasting imprint on society. It serves as a reminder of the complexities of human behavior and the thin line between academic inquiry and real-world consequences. Debates have emerged about whether the justice system should more closely monitor individuals with known warning signs of deviant behavior, and how communities can better address underlying issues like isolation or mental health challenges. The case has prompted discussions about how to better identify and address warning signs in individuals who may be at risk of committing violent acts. In the world of true crime media, the case has reignited debates about ethical storytelling. While the public's fascination with crime stories is undeniable, the balance between informing and sensationalizing remains a delicate one. Media outlets and content creators are increasingly called upon to approach such stories with sensitivity and respect for those directly affected. A closing reflection. As the world moves forward, the case of Bryan Kohberger remains a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of seeking justice with integrity and compassion. For the families and community of Moscow, it is a chapter that will never truly close, but one that has spurred meaningful change and reflection. In reflecting on this case, we are reminded of the enduring questions it raises about accountability, morality, and the human condition. Could earlier intervention or community awareness have prevented such a tragedy? And how do we, as a society, balance the pursuit of justice with the need for prevention and understanding? As we continue to grapple with these issues, the hope is that lessons learned from this tragedy will lead to a safer, more understanding society for all.